A young boy sits alone amid the rubble of a bombed London building, a small figure in a devastated landscape where nearly 30,000 of his city's people would not survive the war's relentless aerial campaign. Along a Paris barricade in 1944, French resistance fighters stand armed against an occupation they had quietly defied for years through guerrilla warfare, underground newspapers, intelligence gathering, and the dangerous work of sheltering Allied soldiers behind enemy lines. On the Place de la Concorde in 1942, a German soldier casually buys a newspaper in a city where Parisians endured curfews, rationing, propaganda, and the quiet humiliation of watching 1 million of their neighbors eventually flee to the provinces for food and freedom. 4 photographs of Eugen Kobitev, taken across 4 years of war, tell the story of a man who survived a German concentration camp where 90,000 perished, escaped captivity in 1943, and fought his way through Ukraine, Moldova, Poland, and Germany back to the life the war had taken from him. In 1916, Mountain Chief interprets a phonograph recording into Plains Native American Sign Language for ethnomusicologist Francis Densmore, whose life's work was preserving the languages and cultures of Native peoples for generations who would inherit a world where fewer than 75 speakers of that sign language remain. Aboard the USS New Hampshire around 1864, a young powder monkey poses for the camera, a boy of perhaps 12 or 14 whose small frame and low profile made him useful for carrying gunpowder between decks and kept him, just barely, hidden from enemy sharpshooters. Photographed together on the Isle of Wight in 1909, Russian Tsar Nicholas II and British King George V stand in matching sailor uniforms, their near-identical appearances a reminder that the two men, whose nations would soon be consumed by revolution and war, were simply cousins. A family portrait from 1951 captures Prince Philip alongside Queen Elizabeth, Prince Charles, and Princess Anne, a moment of quiet domestic life for a family whose public duties would define the decades ahead, and whose patriarch would live to within 2 months of his 100th birthday. Children stand at a window watching their neighborhood burn in Minsk in June 1941, as Operation Barbarossa brought a devastation so total that Belarusia would lose nearly 1/4 of its entire population before the war finally ended. A British veteran of the Napoleonic Wars, who fought in conflicts that reshaped Europe between 1803 and 1815, sits beside his wife for a photograph in the 1860s, his aged face a living bridge across half a century of history. Photographed near the Tennessee River in 1936 by Carl Meidens, a rural mother sits in an open field with 3 of her children. One quiet image in a larger portrait of families enduring the hardship and scarcity of the Great Depression across rural America. At Ramitelli, Italy in 1945, the Tuskegee Airmen, African-American and Caribbean-born pilots, navigators, mechanics, nurses, and support personnel, gather for a photograph that captures a group who fought for a country still debating whether to grant them full equality. At the 1939 World's Fair in Flushing Meadows, New York, Albert Einstein sits with his stepdaughter Margot at the opening of the Jewish Pavilion, 2 members of a family who understood, perhaps better than most, what was gathering across the Atlantic. The men of the 72nd Highlanders, photographed after surviving the Crimean War between 1853 and 1856, stand with the composed bearing of soldiers who had watched Russia fall to an unlikely alliance of Ottoman, British, French, and Sardinian forces on the edge of the Black Sea. Japanese practitioners of Kyudo, the martial art of archery, are photographed around 1860 with their yumi bows. Weapons so exceptionally tall they surpass the full height of the archers who have devoted themselves to mastering them. Winston Churchill and his wife Clementine stand together aboard a naval auxiliary patrol vessel during a 1940 visit to the London docks, a rare quiet moment for a man who had just assumed the weight of leading a nation into its most defining struggle. In Stockbridge, Massachusetts, State Trooper Richard Clemens and 8-year-old Eddie Locke posed together at a diner counter in 1958, lending their faces and their moment to Norman Rockwell's reference photograph for the painting that would appear on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post that September. Winston Churchill, statesman, army officer, Nobel laureate, and twice Prime Minister, is photographed here, a man whose written histories of the world were eventually joined by a history he had helped shape himself, recognized with the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953. President Abraham Lincoln stands with General George McClellan at the general's headquarters in October 1862, a meeting that followed the Battle of Antietam and captured, in a single frame, the weight carried by two men navigating a war that was far from over. Beeple's collage of 5,000 daily images sold at Christie's in March 2021 for $69 million, marking both the peak of the NFT era and the beginning of a collapse that would leave the same work valued at less than $100. Detroit rose to become America's fourth largest city by 1950, powered by the auto industry and nearly 2 million residents. Before deindustrialization, suburban flight, and racial tension stripped away more than 60% of its population over the following 6 decades. Tehran's universities hummed with students in Western dress, studying medicine and engineering in a modernizing, oil-rich Iran, a world that would be swept away before the decade and end by a revolution none of those students could yet fully imagine. Biosphere 2, a $150 million sealed habitat containing 7 distinct biomes, was designed to test human self-sufficiency for potential space colonization. But oxygen levels fell, crops failed, and invasive species flourished in ways that no prototype for the future of humanity was supposed to allow. In the early 1900s, prison escapes were surprisingly common, with inmates fashioning tools from spoons or smuggling in saws, and in 1902 the Biddle brothers of Pittsburgh cut through their cell bars with help from the warden's own wife before being fatally shot days later in the snow. 2 geisha hold their noses beside a sign bearing Winston Churchill's initials in Tokyo in 1941, a propaganda image that used mockery and the double meaning of the letters to dehumanize a British leader seen as the symbol of colonial arrogance standing between Japan and its imperial ambitions in Asia. When President Truman relieved General MacArthur of his Korean War command in April 1951, the expression captured on General Eisenhower's face reflected the gravity of a moment that was nearly unprecedented in American history, and that would permanently reshape the relationship between civilian leadership and military authority. During the hunger winter of 1944 to 1945, Nazi forces blocked food shipments to occupied Dutch cities in retaliation for a railway strike, killing over 20,000 people from starvation and driving survivors to eat tulip bulbs and sawdust bread, while the medical aftermath of the famine led doctors to the first clinical identification of celiac disease. Gustavo Gaviria, known as El Leon and cousin to Pablo Escobar, built the Medellin cartel's financial empire and smuggling networks from behind the scenes, running billions of dollars in cocaine operations until a Colombian police raid ended his life in 1990, upon hearing which Escobar reportedly wept openly. 2 weeks before a Boston performance, Houdini had himself handcuffed, chained, and thrown into the water before 20,000 watching spectators, resurfacing 40 seconds later with the shackles in his hands in a feat that perfectly captured his genius for turning self-imposed danger into spectacle. In 1984, transferring files between a Commodore 64 and an Apple Macintosh required physical ingenuity and custom code because the two systems shared no common format, no USB, no cloud, and no plug-and-play compatibility, embodying a hacker spirit of improvisation that quietly laid the foundations for today's seamless digital ecosystem. Around 1920, the Shelton family posed beside one of the last American chestnut trees, a giant already dead from a foreign fungus that had arrived in New York in 1904 and spread 50 miles a year until it had erased nearly 4 billion trees and fundamentally altered the culture and ecology of Appalachia. In 1980, war correspondent Coşkun Aral talked his way into the cockpit of a hijacked Turkish Airlines flight and captured a photograph of a grinning gunman pressing a weapon to the pilot's neck, while the pilot himself smiled calmly, a surreal image that somehow ended with all passengers released unharmed in Bulgaria. In the 1960s, a parent repurposed a trash can as an impromptu playpen in a public space, a moment that reflects an era when resourcefulness outweighed regulation. Portable child safety products were scarce, and no photograph could go viral to invite the judgment of strangers. After delivering her iconic rendition of Happy Birthday for President Kennedy at Madison Square Garden, Marilyn Monroe was photographed at a private Manhattan townhouse, standing between Kennedy and his brother Robert, slightly blurred in dim light, in a moment the evening's unofficial hush had been carefully designed to contain. In 1838 or 1839, Louis Daguerre photographed the Boulevard du Temple from his Paris studio, and because a man having his boots shined stayed still long enough during the lengthy exposure, he became, entirely by accident, the first human being ever captured in a photograph. Charles Harrelson, father of actor Woody Harrelson, was convicted in 1982 for the assassination of federal judge John Wood Jr., a contract killing carried out for $250,000, after which he spent the rest of his life in prison, confessing to crimes that included, among others, the killing of a president. In 1961, former Hollywood actress Grace Kelly returned to the United States as Princess of Monaco for an official White House luncheon hosted by President and Mrs. Kennedy, a single afternoon in which the worlds of cinema, European royalty, and American political glamour converged under one roof. In 1982, artist Agnes Deans planted 1.8 acres of wheat on a Manhattan landfill behind the World Trade Center, harvesting 1,000 pounds of grain from land that would eventually be worth $5 billion, and sending the seeds onward to 28 cities in an exhibition about hunger, commerce, and the value of the earth beneath our feet. Buffalo Central Terminal opened in 1929 as a grand Art Deco way, handling over 200 trains and 10,000 passengers daily, before the post-war decline of rail travel emptied it entirely by 1979, leaving behind a soaring architectural time capsule that only now is beginning to find its second life. Outside the modern town of Marathon, a burial mound holds the ashes of 192 Athenian warriors, who died repelling a vastly larger Persian force in 490 BC, interred together beneath 40 feet of earth, in a form of honor that had largely fallen from custom, making their collective tomb a deliberate and lasting tribute to heroic sacrifice. Al Capone built the most profitable crime syndicate of the Prohibition era, expanding his empire through gambling, bootlegging, and the murder of rivals. Yet despite orchestrating the Valentine's Day's massacre and years of unchecked violence, it was unpaid income taxes that finally put him in a federal prison cell in 1932. Socks, the tuxedo cat adopted by Chelsea Clinton and brought to the White House during the Clinton administration, received fan mail from children around the world, visited schools, appeared on the official White House website, and posed at the press briefing podium in a photograph that made him, long before the age of social media, arguably America's first viral cat. On Easter Sunday in 1960, David Latimer planted a spiderwort sprout in a sealed 10-gallon glass bottle, opened it once in 1972 to add water, then sealed it permanently, leaving the plant and the bacteria in its compost to sustain each other through photosynthesis and decomposition entirely on their own for 60 years. In 1959, Volkswagen briefly offered a dashboard coffee maker so rare that fewer than 6 are believed to survive today, a device with no power switch, magnetic porcelain cups, and coffee quality, described by one owner as somewhere between tepid and desperate, retailing at the equivalent of over $100 in today's money. The W-54 nuclear warhead weighed just 51 pounds, fit inside a backpack, and packed the explosive force of up to 1,000 tons of TNT. Yet its blast radius was wide enough to kill the very soldier carrying it, making it one of the most quietly terrifying objects the Cold War ever produced. Deadwood, South Dakota, photographed in 1877, just 3 years after General Custer's expedition discovered gold nearby, was already a lawless boomtown of 25,000 people where Wild Bill Hickok had been shot dead at a poker table the previous summer, a sentence so raw it had outgrown any government before one could be built. The Brennan farmhouse once stood on what is now the corner of 84th Street and Broadway in Manhattan, a rural retreat where Edgar Allan Poe is said to have stayed during the 1840s, lending the unremarkable countryside home a layer of legend before the expanding city swallowed it entirely before the century's end. The Michael Myers mask that would terrify generations of moviegoers began its life as a mass-produced Captain Kirk mask, altered with wider eye holes, brushed-out hair, and a coat of white paint. In 1977, James Bond received a message on his smartwatch in The Spy Who Loved Me, a detail that felt like pure fantasy but quietly anticipated the connected wearable technology billions would carry on their wrists decades later. Demonstrated first at the Great Exhibition of 1897, the Pluto lamp was an early automated vending machine capable of dispensing hot water, coffee, tea, cocoa, or beef tea essence, inaugurated on Exmouth Street, London, in 1899. In 1923 Germany, children stood beside a tower of 100,000 marks, a sum representing the complete economic devastation of a nation whose currency had collapsed so completely that a single American dollar held equal worth. Captured in 1933, this photograph preserves the last known image of the Tasmanian tiger, a creature whose extinction would leave a permanent and irreversible absence in the natural world. Introduced in 1917 by British artist Norman Wilkinson during a period of devastating German U-boat attacks, Dazzle camouflage transformed Allied ships into bold geometric puzzles designed not to hide vessels, but to confuse enemy targeting entirely. Built by billionaire Howard Hughes in 1947, the massive Hughes H-4 Hercules, nicknamed the Spruce Goose, claimed its place as the world's largest aircraft despite taking to the skies only once in its entire existence. Yuri Gagarin and Valentina Tereshkova, the first man and woman ever to travel beyond Earth's atmosphere, posed together in this photograph from the 1960s, two pioneers sharing a moment of remarkable historical symmetry. Traveling aboard his imperial train in 1902, a rolling palace of 10 carriages encompassing sleeping quarters, a kitchen, workshops, and even a church, Tsar Nicholas II moved across Russia in a world of extraordinary private comfort. In 1966, Mary Wells Lawrence sat at the center of Madison Avenue's advertising world, a founding partner of Wells Rich Green, and at that time, the first and only female chief executive of a company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. In 1986, liquidators worked in the immediate vicinity of Chernobyl's destroyed reactor, their presence in that contaminated landscape a testament to the extraordinary and deeply costly human effort required to contain the worst nuclear disaster in history. In 1939, as the shadow of war fell across Europe, the Grande Gallery of the Louvre stood entirely empty, its priceless collection quietly evacuated to safety, the vast hall bearing an unusual and haunting silence. On December 13, 1972, astronaut Gene Cernan smiled for the camera on the lunar surface, his spacesuit thickly coated in the fine gray dust of the moon. A warm human moment near the end of humanity's final Apollo landing. Photographed by the Red Cross around 1930, a teenage girl in Arkansas cooked alone on an old stove, her mother away in a tuberculosis sanitarium, the weight of the Great Depression resting quietly on her young shoulders. On November 14, 1960, 6-year-old Ruby Bridges walked to William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans, escorted by United States Marshals dispatched by President Eisenhower, becoming the first African-American child to integrate an all-white elementary school in the American South. A London milkman continues his morning rounds at Streatham Grammar School in 1939, the ordinary rhythm of daily life, carrying on with quiet dignity at the very threshold of the Second World War. Crafted in 1490 and now held at the Bottashoe Museum in Ontario, these German Gothic Sabbatons represent the extraordinary intersection of functional armored protection and the refined aesthetic ambitions of late medieval craftsmanship. In 1932, aircraft designer Max Widenhoft took his rocket-powered bicycle out for a test ride, embodying that particular interwar spirit of restless human invention that sought to attach thrust to almost anything with wheels. In 1974, Philippe Petit walked a tightrope strung between the twin towers of the World Trade Center, crossing again and again above the streets of New York in an act of breathtaking, unauthorized, and entirely unforgettable human daring. Photographed by Jacob Riis in 1887 on Jersey Street, an Italian immigrant woman sits with her baby in a cramped tenement room, her quiet endurance a window into the daily reality of New York's poorest and most overlooked residents. Washed ashore at Hastings, England, in 1919, the German submarine U-118 became an unexpected seaside landmark, its rusting hull a strange and silent remnant of the industrial violence of the First World War. In 1999, the NBA champion San Antonio Spurs gathered after a game for a LAN Starcraft party, a small and unexpectedly human detail that captures a particular moment in the overlapping history of professional sport and early gaming culture. Before the chisels and dynamite of Gutzenborglum transformed it forever, the sacred Lakota site known as the Six Grandfathers stood in its natural form in 1927, its ancient granite face unmarked by the monument it was about to become. In a Detroit street during the 1940s, an ice fountain offered a small, cool relief to passers-by, its simple presence a reminder of the everyday urban pleasures that shaped the texture of mid-century American city life. For 6 months in 1969, the Army Corps of Engineers halted the flow over Niagara's American Falls entirely, exposing the bare rock face beneath in order to conduct a geological survey of erosion threatening the waterfall's long-term stability. Now on display at the Musei Vaticani, this Etruscan shield from pre-300 BC Etruria endures as a tangible remnant of a sophisticated civilization whose art and craftsmanship would quietly shape much of what came after it in Western culture. In 1919, pilot Charles Godefroy threaded his aircraft through the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, its 29-meter-high opening just wide enough to accommodate the 9-meter wingspan of his plane in a stunt of extraordinary precision and nerve. Between takes on the set of 2001, A Space Odyssey in 1965, cast and crew relaxed in their extraordinary costumes, the boundary between the film's meticulous vision of the future and the ordinary human need for rest quietly dissolving. Photographed in 1858, veterans of Napoleon's Grande Armée posed in the original uniforms they had worn decades earlier, their aged faces and faded insignia, offering what may be the only surviving visual record of men who had marched across the continent of Europe. On a German railway platform in 1931, a slot machine dispensed warm sausages to passing travelers, a small invention that speaks to the era's appetite for mechanical ingenuity, applied even to the most modest everyday conveniences. Ladder 3 was among the first fire companies to arrive at the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. And its crew did not survive the collapse of the North Tower. Their truck now stands preserved at the 9/11 Memorial Museum in New York City. Invented by Chicago's Charles Steinlauf and photographed in 1939, the family bicycle combined a tandem cycle with a working sewing machine, its projecting legs doubling as a kickstand, in a design that united family recreation with domestic productivity in one improbable machine. The Paris skyline of 1890 stretched low and unhurried across the horizon, a city still recognizably shaped by Haussmann's grand redesign, but not yet defined by the tower that Gustave Eiffel would deliver to the world the very following year. Photographed in 1955, the modern American kitchen gleamed with post-war optimism, its appliances and clean surfaces reflecting a decade that placed tremendous faith in domestic technology as the foundation of a comfortable and orderly family life. Passing through Syracuse City Hall in 1936, the New York Central Railroad's streamliner Mercury represented the height of American industrial design, its sleek form carrying passengers through a landscape still struggling toward recovery from the Great Depression. Photographed on June 22, 1900, the Dakota Sioux leader Joseph Two Bulls sat for a formal portrait, his image preserved at a moment when indigenous American lives and cultures were being recorded, often for the first time, through the lens of outsiders. In 1936, French engineers proposed an audacious plan to extend a roadway directly onto the second floor of the Eiffel Tower, a project that, had it been realized, would have permanently altered one of the world's most recognized structures. In a Pskov school in 1975, Soviet children sat before a chessboard in quiet concentration, learning a game the state actively promoted as a tool of intellectual discipline.